Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So what I want to talk to you guys about today is a new book series that I just finished, and I have like a lot of mixed opinions about it. So obviously with any video, like these are my own opinions, you're totally entitled to believe whatever you want to believe. These are just some thoughts that I figured I would share with you. So the series is the Truly Devious series by Maureen Johnson. I'll put pictures of the titles somewhere because I got them from the library. I read them on my Kobo, so I don't have the physical copies to show you. And I guess I finished the series probably in 4 days. If I look at my Goodreads, I can double check. So I think that accounts for something. They're really enjoyable, really fast, quick, and easy reads. And I think for me it was a really good way to kind of get myself back into the mystery genre. I've been really trying to work my way back into reading some heavier books because I haven't been reading for so long that it takes me quite a while just to get myself in that headspace. So yeah, let's dive into that. So, for those of you who don't know, basically the Truly Devious series follows this student whose name is Stevie, and she gets accepted to go to this super elite school called Ellingham Academy that was built in the 1930s, kind of way up in this mountain. And the founder of the school basically found it for kind of I want to say gifted, but kind of really unique children. So people with very, very niche interests that they just love doing that one thing. So kind of to be a place where instead of them being forced to follow a curriculum, they it caters to their interests. But the founder of the academy is wrapped up in one of the most infamous unsolved murder cases of all time, and this is why Stevie has come to the school, because she's obsessed with solving it. So she's kind of this shy, awkward kid with anxiety. She doesn't really feel like she fits in anywhere. She's a complicated relationship with her parents. She comes to the school because she wants to solve this murder. Of course, she ends up making friends along the way, and there is of course, a modern mystery that happens at the school while she's there that kind of intertwines the history of the past with the history of the present. So, for starters, some things that I liked about the book, I loved Ellingham Academy, the whole way it was described and everything like that. I just thought it was fascinating. If I can ever build my own house, it will have secret passageways, just for fun. I think that's so fascinating, and I also love old architecture and things like that, where it's not just a metal building. There's a lot of history and thought put into it, which a lot of it you understand when they explain where Ellingham got all this stuff from. So there's a little bit of pressure and awkwardness around the money aspect of it that he's using, but you can also really understand that he appreciates art and he appreciates these students, and he really wants to do for them everything that he can do. So I think some of the comments about education that play into that, and the way that the students are allowed to learn, there's a lot of self-led learning. This is for your junior and senior year of high school, but they describe it a lot like a university, and I think for a lot of people, especially for me, I love the university style of learning. In high school I found they give you so many work periods for something that takes 5 minutes, and it was driving me insane. So I thought that was really well done. Another thing I really love about this book or the series, is the main characters. I think they're all very interesting and layered. How that develops over the series is something I'll talk about when I get more into a spoiler review. But they're all very niche, and they all have kind of their own personalities and their own styles and everything, which I really, really like. I feel it makes the characters more developed, and it makes it a lot easier for you to get into the story and really visualize who those people are. So Stevie lives in Minerva House, and that house is 6 students including herself, and each one of those students has a complicated backstory, I feel that lets you just visualize them brilliantly in your head. So her best friend Janelle, they're always talking about oh, she has this lemon dress that she wears for luck, and her clothing and style is very unique, which helps. But she's also this brilliant mechanic, and she always has tools and things that are lying around. So so I kind of liked that too. I also kind of liked the idea of, like, they all have the same bedroom, but, like, the way that each of them uses the space is completely unique, was really interesting to me. It has a really great platonic male-female friendship, which I think is really hard to find in YA fiction. Between Stevie and Nate, they do a really good job developing that, and I think it's also a really interesting friendship because it's not, like, your standard friendship, in the sense that, like, oh, we have to hang out and be with each other all the time, and I think it's really important to recognize that, like, friendship can come in a bunch of different ways, so it's, like, super important to recognize just because you don't have the type of friendship that you see online for, like, whatever reason, or you read in books and movies, it's important to recognize that that friendship doesn't mean it's more valid. Like, I have people who I'm such good friends with that I haven't talked to for months, but it doesn't mean that that friendship means any less to us. So I think that's something really important that the school, that Maureen Johnson does a great job with. I think the mystery, this is tricky for me to get into without spoiling it, but in the first book, the Allingham murders and the way that those murders are set up, I think is brilliantly done. It's very interesting, very, like, you know, she pulls from, it reminds me of Clue a little bit, but she also pulls from, like, Agatha Christie novels and Sherlock Holmes, so if you are a connoisseur of mystery like I am, you're definitely gonna, like, appreciate a lot of those, like, little niche things that she's thrown into the back, and, I think that makes it more valuable if you feel like you can be solving the mystery along. If you're just, like, getting the clues when the characters get the clues, then, like, it's hard if you don't have the ability to start, like, piecing those together on your own, because then you're not, like, oh, I want to keep reading because I think it's this person. You need some sort of, like, motivation to keep going. So I think in the first book, okay, so to talk about the series as a whole, I think the first book is the strongest, and it kind of, like, deteriorates from there, which I feel like is a common thread with series. I do think I've never written more than one book. I've not even finished my first book. But I think it's incredibly complicated to keep, like, a story going for that long, and I definitely think there was, like, moments when it almost felt like she hadn't really planned what was coming next, so she was kind of, like, tossing things together at the last minute. So that made it really difficult to, like, follow with, or, like, at certain points, because she was dealing with, like, the modern mystery and the mystery of the past, I felt like one was always getting thrown to the wayside. Like, Stevie was always super obsessed with the Allingham murders, or she was, like, super obsessed with what was going on campus, and it didn't always do a good job of, like, balancing the two, so then when you would jump back to the other murder, I would be like, I completely forgot what was happening here. So I think that the way that they get weaved together at the end of the series, I wasn't over the moon with. Another, like, critique that I have, just, like, a generic one of the series, is the side characters. They don't get developed very well at all. Like, they kind of have these, like, almost like typecast type personalities. Like, you have the super strict teacher, and you have, like, the, oh, super bubbly, everyone can talk to me type teacher, and you have, like, the weird goth kid, and I just felt like they were, like, these, like, little, like, box people. That doesn't make any sense. But they just, like, they were so flat to me that, like, when the book tried to pull them forward, I, like, didn't care. And, like, sometimes when they were talking about these secondary characters, I was like, why is this person relevant? Like, I kept waiting for the relationship to develop with the main characters more, so that, like, I understood their purpose in the story, but half the time it just felt like they were there, which I think is, like, a major problem in a story if you're, like, reading it and you're like, oh, cool, it's this dude again, why is he here? And I think the story suffers as it continues because of that, because as those characters become more important, the investment that the reader has with them doesn't grow to match that, and I think that's a major fault in the story. Just another couple, like, pros about the books. Stevie has anxiety, another thing that, like, deteriorates across the books, but her representation of anxiety in the first book is wonderful. I really appreciate it because I, like, can relate to a lot of what Stevie is feeling, just, like, these feelings of, like, dread and, like, apprehension over things that, like, shouldn't matter, and these panic attacks that just come out of nowhere. And they do a really good job with, like, her friends being there and helping her coach her through it, and, like, her talking about, like, her own methods of dealing with it, breathing techniques and things that she learned from therapists. But as, like, the books go on and things get more intense, it feels like Maureen Johnson just, like, doesn't know what to do with Stevie's anxiety, so she just kind of, like, forgets about it, or it'll, like, get brought up in, like, really weird ways where it's like, oh, Steve was about to have a panic attack and then she didn't, and you're like, that doesn't make sense. So I found that very difficult, because there was, like, clearly moments where Stevie was experiencing these very, like, high-stress situations, which, like, sometimes I think they do a good job of explaining, like, if somebody else is more anxious, it'll, like, cancel your own anxiety out. But it was, like, she hasn't slept, she's not eating and things like that. How is this not, like, also aggravating her mental health? I think that could have been a lot better explored. And then in the third book, I guess this is a spoiler. We'll get into, okay. We'll stop there. The third book, her representation of anxiety just falls by the wayside, and it frustrated me a lot reading it, because I was like, I loved this character, she was so well developed, what did you do to her? One last, I guess, non-spoiler thing that I really wanted to mention is representation is fairly well done in this book. They have a character whose name is Vi, and they use they, them pronouns. They're, like, a really interesting and unique character. I do wish they had a little bit more background, just because I found them fascinating and I would have liked to know more about them. But I think that the use of they, them pronouns anytime in literature is, like, still something that's, like, really struggling. Like, we're starting to get better with more, like, gay, lesbian, bisexual stories, but I think it's also really important to recognize trans or non-binary folks as well. So I thought that that was really impressive for her to just have a character, and the way that they deal with it is, like, beautiful. In the first book, Janelle is talking to Stevie about Vi, and, Stevie misgenders Vi and just says, like, oh, she, and Janelle just goes, no, they, and Stevie goes, sorry, they, and then just continues talking, and I loved that, because I was like, it's not about you, you know, like, just correct yourself and, like, move on, and then Stevie doesn't mess up from then on, because, like, she knows, and it's like, yes, this is how it needs to be done. We don't need, like, an 8-page backstory about, like, whatever's going on. Vi just is who they are, and I think that's, like, an amazing character to have in a YA book for people to see. So, enough of that. Spoilers. Okay, I'm gonna get back into Stevie's anxiety, because this really irks me. The way she solves the murder in the third book, she just has a panic attack, which is, like, somehow a moment of utter clarity for her. I'm gonna start crying because I'm laughing so hard. I hated that, because I was like, okay, when you're having a panic attack, it's like everything else in the world just, like, melts away, and all you can, like, obsess on is, like, the fact that you feel like you're gonna die, pretty much, or just, like, whatever really stupid thing triggered it. So, this is from my own personal experience with anxiety, and maybe other people have different experiences, but I just, like, I was so upset that we had, like, such a good character and such a good representation of anxiety, and then we hit, like, the second and third books, and it just, like, stopped, and it just, like, hurt me so much that I was like, why is her anxiety, like, now a plot device? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Maureen Johnson, why? I don't understand it. You were doing such a good job, and then you had to go and ruin it. Sorry, don't mind me with my orange juice. Yeah, that really hurt. Also, oh my gosh, this pisses me off to no end. Stevie and David's relationship makes no sense. Okay, in the first book, right, they're just, like, make it out randomly, and, like, they don't really know what's going on, and I was like, okay, cool, like, that makes sense for, like, a developmental moment in a teenage relationship. They kiss you, you have all these weird emotions, you end up kissing them back, and, like, you don't really know what to do, so you don't really talk about anything. Understandable. But I was like, okay, we have 3 books. I expect somewhere in these 3 books there to be a point where they, like, sit down and, like, talk about their feelings, and instead we get this, like, plot line where it's like, they make out, Stevie or David does something stupid that pisses the other one off, and then it's like, oh, they get over it, and they make out again, and then somebody does something stupid which just, like, pisses one of them off, and then they stop talking, and then they get over it, make out again. Like, even David's, like, emotional backstory just gets, like, kind of forgotten about when Ellie dies, and it's like, dive into that. That's interesting. Like, there's so much with, like, Senator King and, like, Stevie and Dave's beliefs that are, like, so similar, that, like, mesh so well, that I'm like, yeah, I, like, can understand where this relationship is coming from. You have to, like, take me there with you. You have to, like, show me them having these conversations and, like, finding these similarities between each other and, like, coming together to deal with, like, their anxieties and things like that. That's something else that really frustrates me, is, like, he's never there when she's, like, dealing with her anxiety, and it frustrates me because I'm like, okay, this is not, like, a complete relationship, and I think it's also really important to show that, like, she could have a successful relationship without anxiety, like, or sorry, with anxiety. Like, sometimes, like, he also struggles sometimes with anxiety, and she's able to, like, overcome her own to help him. But, like, besides her panic attack in the 3rd book, which is already problematic because it's, like, a mystery-solving panic attack, like, that's the only time he's, like, there when something happens, and I'm like, no, these need to have, like, a healthy relationship. It's not just them making out quarters and then getting pissed off at each other. I don't know. This is just getting me, like, more riled up the more I talk about it, so I'm gonna stop with that. Oh, the 3rd book, guys. There's nothing worse than, like, reading a trilogy and just, like, sighing deeper. Like, with every page you turn, you're like, oh, great. So that's something else, like, with the secondary characters. If you've read the books, you know that, like, Call Me Charles, Dr. Charles, or Dr. Scott, commits the murders, and it feels like such a cop-out to me. But the 3rd book, I was figuring out that they were going to blame it on a teacher or some sort of adult. But, like, I wanted it to be an adult that I actually knew something about. Like, I feel like the betrayal and, like, the understanding of the murderer, like, obviously, we're never going to fully understand the murderer, but I think it's more interesting when you can at least see where they're coming from. That was, like, all out the window. I was like, cool, this, like, super jumpy teacher that, like, loves teaching, just, like, wants all this money for himself, even though he's, like, pretty successful and probably could make a lot of money on his own, but whatever. Yeah, so that's where my thoughts stand on that. It didn't make sense. It did not make sense in his character. It, like, was underdeveloped. The fact that he just dies immediately afterwards is, like, such a poor ending to the story. Like, give him a chance to, like, justify himself. Like, he doesn't have to do the villain speech, but at least so, like, the reader understands where he's coming from a little bit better. Because it just didn't fit. Like, he was such this, like, jovial, caring guy that there was, like, no glimpse of him wanting some sort of, like, further power. Like, when they're literally, like, talking about him, like, murdering people, and then they're talking about, like, his Funko Pops in his office, I'm like, this doesn't... It doesn't work. Like, she didn't do a good enough job of developing that character that I believed that that was something that he was capable of doing. I think that's the best way to put it. So yeah. I was very frustrated with the end of these books. There was a lot of things that, like, really started to grate on me as I was reading them, and the more that I've, like, thought about it, and now that I'm talking about it, I'm realizing, like, how much that took away from, like, my experience and my joy of reading the stories. I think one other thing that I'll just mention before I wrap up here is the mysteries. So, I talked about the way the mysteries were really interesting and really, like, intricately done. I think they did such a better job with the Ellingham mysteries than with, like, the modern mysteries that, like, include the deaths at Minerva House. and of Dr. Fenton, because you get these, like, really interesting flashbacks to, like, what was happening in, like, the 1930s with Ellingham and his friends, and I think that was really important, because to me, I was, like, trying to, like, dissect and unravel what was happening, and I was able to, like, solve the mystery before Stevie did, and there was, like, so much going on there, and I think it also made me more invested in the murders, because I knew those people. Like, I knew who was suffering from it, and I knew what was happening. I just remembered something else that occurred to me in the book. Okay, can we just talk about the line where... Is it Mackenzie or Montgomery? Okay, somebody in the book says that, like, Dr. Ellingham is loyal to his wife, which means he only has one mistress. I know it's 1936, but, like, I loved his character, and that, like, ruined it for me. I was like, this does not... Like, I get the whole idea was they were supposed to be the picture-perfect family, but, like, when you peeled it apart, it's like, oh, Iris was unhappy, and she was doing cocaine, and, like, Albert was just, like, not really caring for his family's needs, and being, like, self-centered and focusing on what he wanted. But, like, the way he reacted to the kidnapping, you saw, like, the love and the care for his family. So, like, the random affair that is just, like, thrown in and, like, never really developed outside of, like, police transcripts or relevant to the murders was, like, frustrating as hell. I was like, why? Why is this here? Like, it didn't do anything except, like, change my perspective of Ellingham, which was, like, frustrating because I didn't feel like it aligned with what I already knew about him. Okay. Enough sidebars. I forget what I was even talking about to begin with. Oh, the murders. That's what I was talking about. Okay. So the modern murders, there's, like, no... Like, I feel like it would have been so much more interesting if you were, like, cutting to the murderer, like, talking and planning these things, and there was, like, seeds planted so you could figure it out in the same way that it was flashing back to what was happening in 1936 with those murders. Because the problem was it felt like Hayes and Ellie and Dr. Finn's death just kind of, like, fell by the wayside. And then in her, like, panic attack wisdom, Stevie just figures it all out at the end of the third book, which I didn't like, because I was like, how was I supposed to know? How was I supposed to see that coming? Like, I want to go through the mystery with you. The reason I'm reading it is because I'm like Stevie. Well, I can't listen to true crime, it depresses me too much, but, like, I like reading about mysteries. I love trying to, like, solve them and, like, figure out who done it, so it was, like, aggravating to me that that was, like, taken away from me. And I also felt like it didn't do Hayes, like, obviously it was super unfortunate he died, but, like, particularly Ellie, like, I feel like it didn't really do her death justice. Like, she died in, like, a horribly horrific way. These characters are, like, barely coping with it, and then they just kind of, like, forget about it, and Stevie goes and, like, focuses on this 1936 murder instead. Like, I think she got too wrapped up in, like, planning about the Ellinghams that she forgot to figure out how the present murder was gonna, like, weave back. So that was, like, disappointing to me, and I think that's what made the outcome so much more disappointing, because there was, like, when she figured out the Ellingham murder, there was enough for you there to be like, oh, it's George Marsh. Like, even before the Sherlock Holmes thing, you were starting to piece it together and be like, I think he's the one who did it. Or at least for me, when I was reading it. With Hayes and Ellie's murders, I was like, no one makes sense that they've done this. Absolutely no one. Like, I was so confused. I was, like, running through all the characters in my mind. I was like, we haven't really, like, dealt with motivation besides, like, the generic money motivation. But it's like, they all work at a school that's, like, stupid, filthy rich. Don't they get paid a ton of money? Like, I'm sure when you have, like, 7 or 8 degrees, you could, like, go and lecture somewhere and they would probably pay you decent money. I don't know. I don't know how professors get paid, but why? That murder, just why? Okay, I'm gonna shut up now, because obviously I'm getting myself very flustered and upset about these books. If I were to rate them, okay, I'm gonna rate them individually, and then I'm gonna rate the collective series. So I feel like it would go 4, 3, 2. So Truly Devious being 4, The Vanishing Stair being 3, and The Hand on the Wall being 2, just because of that, like, downward spiral of character development and the mystery and the representation in the stories. was really upsetting to me. I, like, ended up, I think when I was finishing it, I was just like, I'm in too deep now, I have to finish these books. But I was really, really upset that I invested so much time, and then, anyways, I think the series as a whole, I'm probably gonna go with, like, the middle and give it 3 stars, because there was, like, the fact that I was able to finish the series, I think is something that I do have to give it props for, as much as it, like, aggravated me. I at least, like, there was at least enough there to keep me reading, which is important. And I think if you want to get back into mysteries, it's not like a bad thing to get into. You could probably stop after the 2nd book. A lot of what happens in the 3rd book, nothing really major happens till the end in my opinion. But anyways, if you want, feel free to check them out. If there's better information that you want me to include in reviews next time, please let me know in a comment down below. I blog as well. There'll also be a link down to my blog, and you can check me out on Instagram. And those are both at Sleep Create Caffeinate, because I love to explore art, and I think we all need a little bit more art in our lives. So feel free to give me a subscribe if you like this video, and I'll try and post a lot more frequently, especially being at home with nothing to do but sit on my phone in front of a book tripod with my camera. Yeah, so that's everything for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you've read the series, please leave me a comment with your thoughts. I'd be super curious to hear about what other people thought about the mysteries and how it all came together in the end. And thanks for watching. Bye!